Welcome to this video on aggregate calculations. You can download the exercise workbook to follow along in your own copy of Tableau. Have you ever seen an AGG at the beginning of a pill? This stands for aggregation and tells us that the aggregation is built into the calculation rather than performed after the fact. For example, we'll create a profit ratio. Double-click on the column shelf, and we'll type sum of profit divided by sum of sales, and we'll hit enter. Notice that the pill now begins with AGG instead of sum. This means that the aggregation is part of the calculation itself. For more information on how the ratio calculation is written, please refer to the video Aggregation, Granularity, and Ratio Calculations. We know what AGG means, but what about ATTR? This is another common thing seen with aggregate calculations. Let's say we want to aggregate separately for different dimension values. For example, we want to average corporate sales, but take the median of sales for the other customer segments. Right-click in the data window and select Create Calculated Field. We'll call this Segment Sales. In the calculation editor, I'm going to paste in the calculation. Feel free to pause the video and copy it down yourself. This says, if the segment is corporate, then take the average of sales. Otherwise, take median sales. But Tableau tells us there's an error. Cannot mix aggregate and non-aggregate comparisons. So we need to aggregate segment, but how? By using the attribute aggregation. We'll wrap segment in ATTR. Make sure to include the parentheses. And now the calculation is valid, and we'll hit OK. Let's add segment sales to the view. And now we can see that the average corporate sales is much larger than the median sales for the other segments. But what did attribute do? Attribute checks to see if there is only one value for a given field for all rows in the result set. If only one value for the data is selected, attribute returns that value. If there is more than one value for the subset of data, it returns an asterisk. Another way of thinking about the attribute function is as the equivalent to the logical test, if min equals max, then return that value. We could also use min or max if we know that there's only one value. All of these aggregations are useful for aggregating dimensions to get around errors like the one we saw. Finally, what about aggregated versus record-level calculations? Let's look at the average sale per order. We'll start by right-click dragging sales onto the columns shelf. This allows us to choose an aggregation. Select Average and click OK. This is the average sale per row of the database, which consists of product-level transactions, not order level. We want to group multiple items sold into a single sale for a given order and to take the average of that, not a record-level average. To do this, we'll create a calculated field. Right-click, select Create Calculated Field, and we'll name it Average Order Sales. Averages are calculated by summing a set of values, then dividing by the number of values. So we'll do the sum of sales divided by a count distinct of order ID. Be sure to do a count distinct and not a simple count. Doing a count would count the number of records, whereas a count distinct counts the number of distinct orders. Now we'll bring average order sales to the column shelf. We see that these values are larger than the average sales values, which makes sense because we are taking the average of values summed to the order level rather than the record level. Thank you for watching this video on topics pertaining to aggregate calculations. We invite you to continue with the on-demand training videos to learn more about using Tableau.